I just wanted to quickly talk about my issue with being a carer, which was that my mum and dad were divorced and I was looking after them both. So I think the other thing that I'd like to talk about is there was some jealousy there from my dad. He was very angry that I got my mum living with me. He felt that I should have lived with him. So there was a sort of tearing me apart as a carer, and there was conflict there. I think also it was how I split my time. So how did I spend time with my dad and also my mum? They lived within 10 miles of each other, but they were divorced and neither of them liked the other. So it had escalated all the way through them living in the same town and me trying to look after them by taking them to appointments. And they'd see each other in Tesco's, and then I'd get a phone call and my dad would be, "I've just seen your mother in Tesco's and she said to me that you this morning." So just prepare as a child of divorced parents, and so many of us are nowadays, that there may come a time when you're sort of split apart between caring for different members of your family who both have different requirements and who might also not like each other very much. And that might be an issue for you to kind of handle. And how you handle it is quite difficult. And it's, I think after my dad died, has probably given me more guilt about his death than anything else. Did I do as well by him as I did by my mum, who lived with me until she died? Whereas I feel like there were unresolved things with my dad. So that's kind of mine to bear. But I do think in terms of conflict that was an issue that I should have dealt with dad. And I should have been outspoken to him that you're making me feel like this. That you being cross about the fact that I'm now living with mum and looking after her full time and I'm not looking after you full time means that you've gone into a care home and you're angry about that. There were so many things going on, but it was because they were divorced, and so I couldn't physically be in two places at once, and they both couldn't live in my house together under any circumstances. So yeah.
So we thought we'd kind of wrap up by picking up some of the practical strategies, some of which we've talked about, but kind of elaborating them in terms of working out ways forward. So we've talked about regular meetings, and I think a really good thing there is to try and find points of agreement, because it can be very easy in a meeting that you suddenly focus on the things you disagree about, or the areas of disagreement, whereas to actually say, well, look, let's just recap. We've agreed this would be best, we've agreed this would be best, we've agreed this would be in the best interest. That can help resolve some of those tensions.
And writing those things down, really important. Just want to reiterate that one. But I think in terms of agreement, when my dad was dying, one of the things that was clear to the GP, who was absolutely clear about what had happened, that the family dynamics were bad, that relationships had broken down to the point none of us were speaking to each other as he died. But one of the things she said to me once was, my GP, what's really interesting is that you and your sister, both, because my sister was the point of contact for her rather than sister and brother, was that you both agree on what's best for your dad. And so that was quite interesting, that we both wanted my dad to have the best death possible. We didn't want anything being done to him that would prolong his life and make him more uncomfortable. We wanted him to die in the care home. We didn't want to have unnecessary interventions. There were lots of things that we agreed together, and even being talked to separately, because we never came together to talk about it, we had those points of agreement. And I think it's important that however poor the relationship has become, that there are certain things on which you can agree, makes it an easier situation. Obviously that wasn't a particularly easy situation, but what was easy for the people who were caring for my father was that we both agreed on the best way forward, and what was right for dad, which was interesting and important.
Yeah, and it can be a useful touch point. I mean, you particularly see it around divorces and children, is if you focus on what's in the best interest of the child, it can sometimes help to kind of de-escalate some of the tensions between the adults. I think one of the other things is about identifying sort of the underlying tensions, because it may be that what appears to be an argument is actually something below the surface that's not really being talked about. So, for instance, we were talking about inheritance. It may be that there are concerns about the distribution of inheritance, whether it's equal or unequal, or words like fairness can sometimes be used to mean different things to different people. But it may be that's the crux of the real disagreement, but that's not being talked about, and what's being argued about is whether or not they get a carer 2 times at the weekend or 3 times at the weekend, because people are concerned about the estate. So sometimes being able to be aware that actually we're arguing about this, but is this the real issue, or is there some underlying issue that we're really not talking about?
In my experience, a lot of families don't talk to each other at all. They bitch about each other behind each other's backs, and they don't actually have the conversation to start with. So having the conversation to start with is a really good place to do. I'd be very wary of escalating things and going, but what's the underlying tension here? Until you've kind of had some time together, especially if you don't normally talk. Because if you don't normally talk and you're suddenly trying to have conversations about things and someone's going, yeah, but the real underlying thing is that I never liked you and you never liked me, that's not going to get you very far. So I think be aware that there may be other things going on and there are undercurrents to conversations, but also be aware that actually we're starting to talk, and that's a good start. And I think in all of this, be positive about the fact that you're doing something for someone else. Being a carer is a massive undertaking. And I think in any respect, for whatever reason and however much you do or you don't do, you're actually doing something very positive for someone you care about. And that's a really good thing. And although this has been a kind of course, I guess, which is a bit like centred around some negativity, I think also sometimes out of all of these things you can get stronger relationships with people, not less relationships with them.
Absolutely. And sometimes it can be those crises that bring a family together. You know, families break apart, families have splits for all sorts of reasons. You know, I'm thinking my dad's family, they had all sorts of arguments about historic weddings, various breakups, people took sides, but often when someone's ill it actually brings people together, and it brings people together for a common purpose that is about caring for someone and looking after them and making sure they're happy, and making sure their needs are being met. So it can be a positive opportunity, bringing people together. And
I think I've seen that particularly when people are dying. So I remember a son coming to see his father, and the father hadn't thought the son would come. By the time the son did arrive, the father was not able to communicate at all. And I said to him, you know, your dad's dying. What would you like to say to him? And he said, Dad, I love you. And it was incredibly moving that, yes, it was a horrible experience for all concerned, but that at that moment and in that moment, they'd come together. And I think that sometimes things aren't quite as difficult as everyone thinks, and that actually you can come together at the last moment and have some sort of resolution of some conflicts and things that have gone wrong.
And it can refocus people in terms of what the priorities are and important things. And it might be, as you said, that there may have been some trivial disagreement and people hadn't spoken for years, but actually when someone's really ill, when someone's, you know, perhaps when someone's facing death or when a major crisis happened, that suddenly that can put things in perspective and bring people together in a way that they hadn't. I remember my mum decided a few years before she died, she just threw what she called a pretend wake. And she went, all too often families come together at a wake. Why don't we just have a wake, but I'm around? And
Fantastic.
She basically invited all the people she would at a wake, and we had food and had drink and we told stories. And she said, you know, it's such a shame that sometimes that doesn't happen.
There is a theatre group that does that, Dave.
Is there?
Yeah. They hold your funeral whilst you're still alive, so
great.
that you can actually understand, because I always think it's really sad when you go to funerals and you hear things and you think they'd been so proud to hear all the stuff people said about them, and why don't we say that when someone's alive? You know, they'd have been so thrilled that everyone cared about them so much, and they never thought they did. So how brilliant to have that while you're still alive. What a brilliant thing for your mum to do, but she was always like that.
And so I suppose it's kind of our final thought is as Ali said, you know, the focus of this has been on, look, there may be conflict, and anticipating it, preparing for it can really help. But this may also be a time that really brings people together. And caring for people is such a privilege. And a lot of the time I spent caring, you know, particularly for my mum, was some really wonderful times that, you know, we got a chance to share memories, we had a chance to connect. in a way that we hadn't for quite a long time, and it can be a real privilege. So if you anticipate where some of the problems may be and you put in some decent strategies, it can actually be, you know, a much more positive time all round. Hello, I'm Dave Dawes. I'm the Learning Director at Future Care Capital. We're a charity that supports unpaid carers to give them the support and the tools they need to look after their loved ones. We're only able to do this because of your generous donations. Please give whatever you can using the support button on the website. Every pound you give helps us make more and more courses and make them freely available to other carers just like you. Thank you.